Okay, well, thank you for joining us tonight. This month's share of Lancaster's topic is Another Year Without You. Now that we've kind of crossed over into 2022, and what that might look like for people who have experienced a loss last year or are hitting some anniversaries this year. So we just want to take time to talk about that, and as the years go on, how that might differ in your experience. So I have Angie here with us tonight, and we hope that she'll be able to be on these calls. She's got some great content that we can talk about for this year, some great ideas and topics that I think will be really important for just the grief process after a loss, just life after loss, and all the different things that come up that maybe you haven't experienced yet or you're experiencing now, to give you that specific support that you might need. So with tonight's topic, we really just want to talk about those firsts. So whether they're in the past for you or they're coming up this year, those anniversaries can be very difficult and very daunting, just because you don't know what to do with all that grief after a loss. And it could be you didn't make it to your due date, and that due date's coming up, and you just wonder what life would look like if you had gone full term, and if your baby would have lived to that point. That day can be really symbolic and really difficult because you didn't, and what that looks like now. It could be you had planned your baby shower and you didn't make it to that. It could be the first birthday since their passing, or an anniversary of their passing. It could just be a difficult time that you're kind of coming up against. So I guess, Angie, what I really want to ask you is just, what do you do with that grief when you are coming into a day knowing how difficult it's going to be? What are your options to try to, if you have to go to work or you have to kind of just keep going through that day, how do you handle that? How do you manage all of that grief?
Yeah. So I think that if we know that an anniversary is coming up, we can try and give ourselves permission to experience that day in whatever way seems best to us at that moment. So some of us, we have other children, we have jobs, we have responsibilities and things that we have to do for that day. If we can maybe consider what are ways that we can be gentle to ourselves in that day. Can we take a day off just in case we really need it? Can we find a babysitter for the kids? Can we plan some, self-care for that day and kind of just give ourselves space to have whatever experience we're going to have around that anniversary date? In the times when we can't, get some room, there are just things that we have to take care of. I think the idea of maybe having some intentional grieving and having a plan for, at this time of the day, I'm going to do this thing to remember. Sometimes we have to compartmentalize. Sometimes we have to say, look, I've got to take care of the kids. I've got to, go to work. I've got to do these things. But if we can plan that, maybe later in the day, maybe after the kids are in bed, or, once we've gotten home from work, then we're going to spend some time, excuse me, focusing in on ourselves and on our needs and on whatever experience that we're having that day.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I like that it might not work in the day the way you wanted. Maybe you were hoping you could take that whole day and you can't, but you also can say, okay, at lunch that day, I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to take a little bit of extra time, or I'm going to plan something after that will give me the opportunity to kind of like take some sacred space. Maybe not ideal, but at least take that. And maybe it is waiting a couple days and then there's another opportunity to do something like that. But I like that you can still make it work. And I think also, I guess what what kind of would be your advice, just if you're kind of not ready to even acknowledge those days, right? Like you haven't even thought about it. You're just going to keep going. Your loss is new. You want to just completely kind of try to avoid it, maybe because you're just not ready to just look at it head on and just recognize those days yet. What do you recommend when you're not ready?
Yeah, I think just keep on keeping on, you know, go ahead and do whatever seems right to you to do in that day. And you don't have to feel guilty that you didn't do something.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might just be busy, the day goes by, and it's later on, you think to yourself, oh, wow, last week would have been my due date, or, last week was the day that we found out that, our baby was ill.
Mm,
And I didn't think about it. I didn't
mm,
remember. You don't have to feel guilty about that. It's
mhm.
okay. Give yourself permission to kind of be wherever you are, and
Yeah.
just offer yourself that gentleness and that acceptance that you have your own journey, and that it doesn't have to include um, big events like big anniversaries. It doesn't have to, if that's not your experience, and that's okay.
Yeah. 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 And personally, that's kind of how I handled my grief and my loss. After two losses, I just, for 4 years, wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't even acknowledge the days. I didn't even want to remember the days. But then after those 4 years, I thought, you know what? I'm not feeling any better with this grief.
Mhm.
That approach wasn't working for me. So then I made sure that I noted on the calendar when when the due date was,
Mhm.
um, birthday, all those dates, the dates that we found out that we were pregnant, just those special days, and then really just brought some light to them, because they were kind of just hidden in the dark.
Mhm.
But that was 4 years later. So yeah, I think it's all just when you're ready and when
Mhm.
the time is right for you and when you feel called to do that, and whatever way or whatever days might be important for you to kind of take time for them.
Mhm.
um, but how about just so that maybe another year, like the topic we're talking about tonight, without them is, let's say this is our fifth year after our loss, um, and it's still really difficult, and we just thought that eventually it would be different. What kind of advice would you give people just not knowing how to handle the grief, and like why it's not necessarily changing for them, and why, thinking it would just kind of go away as time goes on, but maybe it hasn't.
Yeah. So time is a funny thing when we're talking about pregnancy loss and when we're talking about grief. Um, when we have other kinds of losses, we kind of have an idea in our minds of like how time works. We go through time, we will eventually start to feel better, and it's okay to like have that pain, and then it kind of you move forward.
Mhm.
Um, Pregnancy loss goes slower sometimes. And as we're talking about the anniversaries, the loss is brought up to us again and again in new
Mhm.
ways. And
Yeah.
sometimes we either seek a new pregnancy or we find ourselves pregnant again. And then we have an entirely new situation that comes up. Sometimes parenting other children will bring it up for us again. And that's okay. It's okay for the loss to be present in our lives. It's okay for the grief to be present in our lives. If we're feeling like every day is just as bad as it was at the very beginning, we're not really seeing any light, we're not really seeing any breath, then there might be some different things happening. And it might be time to seek some professional support
Mhm. Mhm.
to begin to heal.
Yeah.
Um, but if we are seeing little bits of light, if we
Mhm.
are moving forward, even, a little bit, a couple weeks ago, I couldn't get out of bed, but now I get out of bed, and now I'm
Yeah.
showering, and now you know, I'm cooking for myself and I'm eating
Mhm.
regularly again. If we see improvements, that's showing us that healing is happening, even if it seems slow to ourselves or to other
Yeah.
people. We should be generous in our timetable with pregnancy loss, because sometimes people really try and rush us to get over it
Yes.
because
Yes.
loss can be minimized. And so sometimes we feel pressure like, oh, I should be better by now. No, you're
Yeah.
not. There is no should when it comes to how long you're going to feel like you've had a pregnancy loss.
Yeah.
But we can ask ourselves, and comparing for ourselves, do I feel better than I did a week ago, a month ago, a couple months ago? And if we see that improvement is happening and we feel like we're moving in the right direction, then we're probably okay.
Yeah.
If we feel like things are not moving and like things are kind of stuck, then it might be time to start thinking like, I might need someone to help me really work through this. And then it might be
Yeah.
time to reach out to a counselor for support.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe you're trying so hard to make it go away that you're actually, yeah, you're like kind of suffocating yourself. You're making it harder for yourself instead of maybe just letting yourself go through the grief and figure out how, your life is never going to be the way it was before your grief and before your loss. So it's about acceptance of that, right? Like, hey, this is what life looks like now. I have this grief, I have this loss, I have this baby that isn't here. So now what does my life look like? And how can I move forward in a healthy and just a healing way, right? So yeah, you're right. If you
There's
feel like you can do that, then you're, even if it takes a while, you're seeing those little steps towards that. But if you feel like, yeah, I can't get it, there's just so much, then maybe somebody to talk to just kind of share your experience with, kind of walk through all of that experience. The trauma of it all is just,
yeah.
it's heavy stuff. So without really addressing it, how could you get past it, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
an old proverb that says, so high, I can't get over it. So low, I can't get under it. So wide, I can't get around it. I have to go through that door.
yeah,
And that's what it's like with our grief, is that
yeah,
we have to go through it.
yeah.
And as long as we are going through it, then slow or fast, it doesn't matter, as long as it's done
Mhm.
thoroughly and
Yeah,
authentic.
yeah,
But there are times when we, avoid, and then we're not actually taking those steps through the door, walking through our grief. And
yeah,
then sometimes we need help to walk through.
yeah,
So,
yeah. No, that's beautiful. You're right. There's no easy way. There's
mhm.
no easy way. There's no way for somebody to tell you like, oh, if you do this, you'll be okay. You just have to go through it. Yeah. And you kind of have to acknowledge it, that it happened.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then how can I move forward with this loss, and specifically getting the support and being able to talk and space that you feel like you can share your grief.
Mhm.
Um, and then maybe just how you can carry that grief maybe a little bit differently. Instead of constantly finding yourself having to cope, it's more of a relationship, right? Like, how would you describe your relationship with grief now?
Mhm. Yeah, so I had my losses in 2004 and 2005. They were my first and second pregnancies. My first baby, Callan, I lost in my 8th week of pregnancy. And my second baby, Andrew, I lost in my second trimester. So I had 2 August babies, 1 year after another, 2 different trimesters, 2 different kinds of experiences. And yeah, I knew immediately that I needed to make sure not to censor myself and to just feel and think and do whatever, and not to judge my grief experience. Like I had that much wisdom at the time,
Yeah, yeah,
um, to give myself that space.
yeah,
And when you're first, I mean, what words can even describe those early experiences? Searing,
yeah,
gut wrenching.
Yeah.
um, tearing. The word bereaved literally means torn apart,
Mm.
so to be reaved,
Wow.
um, so I mean, it's a good description of what
Yeah.
those early experiences are like.
Yeah.
But, I'm here, 16 and 17 years later. And what I can say is that I don't often have those kinds of harsh, hard, searing feelings anymore. There is, um, there has been a really deep change in my relationship with grief. Um, it's not always or often painful anymore. Instead, that grief is like a lifelong companion now. I am never going to forget my children, and I am never going to be who I was before
Yeah.
I had the experience of losing them. Life is
Yes.
different. I am different
Yes.
because
Yes.
of having them and because of losing them.
Yeah.
My life is different. And so the grief has kind of become a companion now that kind of walks along with me. And every once in a while, it taps me on the shoulder and reminds me of them. And so, in some ways, it's a welcome companion. It's
Mhm.
almost like an internal memorial, an internal touch point
Mhm.
of, who I am now and all the experience that I've had since, back to my babies, back
Mhm.
to them. So I am comfortable with my grief now. I have accepted this companion,
Yeah.
and yeah, and it doesn't hurt. And I want to offer that hope, that, my experience at least is that I don't often feel that same heart-wrenching pain that I did at
Yeah.
first. There's still
Yes.
an emptiness, there's still loss, there's still a wish for what could have been. Um, but it's not what it was.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think what you said, which I don't think anybody thinks about, is that you're not the same after. And I think that's one part, like, your life looks different, but it changes you as a person.
Yeah.
And I think the acceptance of that is probably one of the hardest things, because you kind of feel robbed of, it's almost like you're just being so naive to what other people had gone through, right? And just not having to have that kind of grief sit with you for the rest of your life. It changes you. And then you no longer can be who you were before. You can no longer, forget that trauma, that loss. And you've got to just figure out a different way to build a relationship with it, right? Like, to the new you and the new relationship you have with your child, which isn't tangible, right? It's a heart connection. It's a love. It's a something that actually continues to grow. Um, so yeah, I think that's something people don't really think about, and they wonder why, like, I don't feel like myself anymore, and I can't get back to that. And they strive probably so hard to do that, when really that isn't the goal, and that isn't even possible,
Yeah.
right? The focus is really, okay, this is who I am now after loss. And now what are my days and my years? What are they going to look like? And how am I going to incorporate my loss in my life if I choose to do that? Right. Um, yeah. Yeah. And just that, the way you said about it being like a companion, that they're always with you, because it is, that grief is just your love for them and their absence, and that you don't get to have all those anniversaries with them, and everything that you were kind of robbed of, from
And
them not being
you're
here.
exactly right, is that when the searing pain falls away, what's left is the love. So,
Mhm.
that love and grief go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And, none of us are ever going to experience something as precious and sacred and beautiful as our own children and not be made different by them,
Yeah.
no matter
Yeah.
how long they were with us.
Yeah.
So the loss of them is an incredible loss.
Yeah.
And it's something that, we will never, ever, ever get over. It
Yeah.
makes us different,
Mhm.
but it's not always going to have that same painful quality.
The raw. Yeah. It's not going to be as
That
raw.
same raw. Yeah.
Yeah. You'll have that scar, right? But it'll become the rawness, the wound, the healing, and then you'll always see them. You always have that scar of a reminder, but it won't be so raw and painful. And um, like you said, you might go a week and not feel that, not that the level, you'll feel that all the time, but that those sudden moments of like, getting hit with the grief and the sadness of it, it might happen less, but it's very unpredictable and very,
Mhm.
yeah, you can't really prepare for it. You kind of, like you had said before, you have to go with the flow and let yourself experience it where you're at in that moment, and give yourself, permission to grieve however you want and take space.
Yeah, it's a great point that grief is almost like the tide. You think of
Mhm.
grief as like waves, right? So if you're
Mhm.
standing on the beach, you have these waves that come in, and they come into you over and over again. And that's kind of like what it's like when we first lose our babies, is that these waves just, they come in, they roll out, they come in, they roll
Yeah.
out. And then we have to think about there being tides at the beach. So
Mhm.
sometimes those waves move farther back. And
Mhm.
so they're a little farther away from us. And sometimes they'll come in and kind of, get us, and then they roll out again. But maybe there's a longer time period between when they're rolling in and rolling over us.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
for me, at this point of my healing journey, those waves still come in. Sometimes they still come into me, but they're farther away now, and when they come in, I can kind of accept their coming and say, this is part of what happens when you're a bereaved parent.
Mhm.
And this is the opposite side of that coin of love. And this is just an experience that I go through. And then the wave rolls out again, and we continue on our way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. No.
understanding that in those early days, those waves are always rushing over you, and that's
And
normal.
you're in it. You're in
Yeah,
the water. You're
you're
not
right in
on land yet.
it. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that different, I think that's the part, it's so unpredictable.
Mhm.
What is gonna trigger you, right? I think that's the hardest thing for me. Just certain reminders of my daughters would bring me light, right? They would like fill me and I'd feel so connected to them, right? But then other ones are like a more of a gut punch, like, oh,
Mhm.
that hurt, that was painful. That's
Mhm.
that's something that I haven't been able to really cope with yet,
Yeah.
right? There's another layer that I didn't even think about. A
Yeah.
different anniversary, like, oh wow, I'd have a first grader now, or what that would look like. And like it's all those different times that you might hit different things in layers that
Right.
might only happen when you hit different years,
Mhm.
different anniversaries, different things.
Mm.
So some of the reminders can be good and light and
Yeah.
warm your heart because it connects
Mhm.
you much tighter with them, and others can just really throw you
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
just because you don't expect them, and that's kind of how it is. But
And that's
I
a really
think,
good point, is that you didn't just lose a baby, you
yeah,
lost a toddler and a first
yeah,
grader, and a wedding ceremony where you were dancing with a child
yeah,
at their wedding, and then
yeah,
their children. So it's not
yeah,
just one thing that you've lost,
no,
it's over and over and over again, all the way for the rest of your life, this life that
yeah,
you envisioned when
yes,
you learned that you were pregnant,
yeah,
and or when you first even desired to have a child.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so, there's, they're not only anniversaries, but also just that time going by reminding us of
mhm,
this should have been or could have been. And
yeah,
so it's a fresh
yeah,
loss. And here it is, you can be 30 years later, suddenly thinking to yourself, wow, I might have had a wedding to plan
yeah,
for a
yeah,
child at this point.
yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, it is. Yeah, it's like evolving grief in all different ways and all different new and situations that you haven't even kind of thought
Mhm.
through to find a way to cope because it's so fresh.
Yeah.
Um, but it's helpful to know that the years do, it kind of changes, right? So you change it and you kind of build a different relationship with it. You find different ways to, in a healthy, fulfilling way, honor your babies, but it's also being honest. It's not, the time doesn't take any of it away, just kind of evolves it into a different type of love, maybe not as painful of a love, maybe more of a desired love, and maybe a more yearning love of wanting them to be here. But that as the time goes, it does evolve, which is, I think, helpful for someone who has a new loss to know
Mhm.
that it will change, but
Mhm.
also to be realistic that you're different now, your life's different now,
Yeah.
and just, if you can get support, get as much support as you can, because people who have walked these paths, they know, even if they know enough to just have empathy for you, because that's something that, if you haven't gone through it, it's really hard for people to grasp that, right? Unless they said, well, you didn't even ever have to see the baby, you didn't have to hold them, you didn't have to watch them breathe and then pass. Well, there, every layer of that,
Mhm.
without having empathy, it's hard to explain that to somebody. But when you've been through it, it doesn't matter if you knew for one day you were pregnant and then the next day found out that it wasn't going to keep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still the most traumatic day of your life, right? So um yeah, I think that's really important. And like you said, just give yourself permission to just be where you're at, whatever
Mhm.
year it is. If it's your first year, where are you at with your grief? Where are you at with your healing? Where are you at with getting and seeking support?
Mhm.
um and then as the years go, hey, can I see a difference? Am I getting better? Do I feel like the healing is taking place? Am I able to celebrate an anniversary without, you know, just having that gut wrenching trauma kind of resurface? Is there a way for me to do it in a way that feels safe, healing, and loving? So, yeah, I definitely think that that's important, that, you know, the years will make it evolve, but you also have to put in all the work to get there. Like you've put in the work, right? Like the healing work that it took, you took it right from the beginning. You knew what you needed to do. And you've just gotten better and better at kind of holding that grief and love. And now being able to help other people is just kind of the way to say, hey, I have empathy for you. I see where you're at and I'm here to support you. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that's huge. Well, thank you so much for just talking with us tonight and giving us just so much helpful advice from your experience and from just everything that you've did you want to tell, just because this is the first time people are getting to meet you, just kind of your background in in what you're, with your degree and what you've kind of accomplished, just so that they know where you're coming from with just all the expertise that you have.
Sure. So I am a former doula, childbirth educator. I'm a certified lactation counselor, and I was a, midwifery assistant for many years. After that career, I went back to school to earn a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. I am coming up on the end of that degree. And I am now a perinatal mental health certified by Postpartum Support International.
Mm,
So this is what I will be doing, is working with perinatal families in all different kinds of ways. So, but I am
yeah,
a perinatal bereavement specialist, and it's something that I have spent a lot of time teaching about over the past decade or so. And
yeah,
I love
that's
my
so
little
amazing.
sister. So I think
Yeah,
you do incredible work,
yeah.
and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think it's important that people know, like, you've not only is this something that comes from your heart, but this has become a commitment in your life to get the education and put in all the time. And I mean, that's huge. That's a whole nother level of commitment to helping people, being able to give them such a high level of support and then to offer this to the share community is just, it's huge. And if you've been to any of the burials, you probably have seen, you're at every one. So you're usually the one speaking. And so I think you're a familiar face to a lot of people that have gone to the burials. Will be really, really touching for them to be able to see, because you were with them on probably, one of those really difficult days as well. And I do want to mention that we have the burials. They're always the second Tuesday of every month. And we'll both be there. I'm hoping to be able to make everyone alongside with you, just so that, again, people have that face. They have that somebody that they kind of connect with on such an emotional and just a really personal day that we get to be a part of with them, that they share that day with us and we share that day with their babies. So I think it's nice that we can, again, give them that support and help every month.
Absolutely.
When we do these calls. So thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and post this for those that aren't able to attend. And we'll go ahead and do that every month, just so that we're providing you with the support you need on the time of the day and wherever you're able to get that. So we're happy to do that and give you all of the support that we can offer. So thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you.
And recording.